Hello, welcome to the Legislative Review Committee.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, welcome to the LRC meeting this Thursday, January 19th, in City Hall 301B. I'm here with members of this committee, and I just, in terms of the commissioners here, if we could just do a roll call. Carol Myers, District 8 Commissioner here, that's me.
John Culpepper, District 7 Commissioner, here.
Jesse Houle, District 6.
Allison right here.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask everyone else today to introduce themselves. We have a commissioner who's new this term, and we have Commissioner Thornton walking in. Welcome. So I want to ask staff and everyone else here to introduce themselves, and then we will go on to approve the minutes and take public input. So if we can just start, we'll start to my left.
Okay, I am Sarah George. I'm assistant to the manager in the manager's office, and I'm also one of the staff liaisons for the Legislative Review Committee.
Nikki Jones, one of the assistant managers, obviously with the manager's office, and I am the staff liaison to the LRC.
Hello, Austin Jackson with the attorney's office. I'm assistant attorney here.
And who are you? Oh, we do the.
We've already done our introductions, Ms. Thornton.
Well, you still can tell me who you are.
Back around the turn, Allison. Right. I'm looking at my phone. It says like 1:31. And I know I've been sitting here for a minute. So
Okay.
anyway, I'm Avita Thornton, serving on the LRC. Glad to be here.
Gavin Hassner, Interim Director of Central Services.
I'm Harrison Daniel, Deputy Chief for the Athens-Clarke County Police. God bless you, Athens-Clarke County Police Department.
I'm Angel Helmley. I work for the Central Services Department, handle special event processing.
Alex Bond with Leisure Services.
And Kit Kilpatrick, I'm the Director of Leisure Services.
Okay. Thank everyone for introducing themselves. And could I have a motion now to approve the minutes from November 16th?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved unanimously. And now is a time in our agenda where we're going to take some public input for people who wish to address the Legislative Review Committee on any items listed on the agenda. Under identified items of interest, please state your name and address. And the rules of the commission state that a citizen may speak once for up to 3 minutes with a 30-second reminder at 2.5 minutes. Great. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, that's me.
Yes.
Do I stay here and do this?
Yeah. Just you can sit there and do it, stand up, whatever makes you more at ease.
I brought my card since I'm not a public speaker. I'm Gene Dixon out of the 802 Hardwood Lake Grove in Winterville, Georgia. Give you some quick background. It's going to be off topic a little bit. I arrived in Athens in 1973 at 19 years old and opened a bike shop and went to UK. Supposedly to go to EGA and open a bike shop, but it didn't really end up that way. When I arrived in town, I was welcomed with streaking. I remember streaking, and with 2 tornadoes on Boulevard. So I got a degree in English 101, but somebody told me that you had to take more than one class. So I guess I didn't really get a degree. In 1978, I opened a solar business in Athens, which was just a little bit before its time. Also did the first downtown historic renovation into apartments on Boundary Street. And then in 1980, we launched the Twilight, which is the first American nighttime race. When cycling was extremely popular in the 20s, and we made it again that way in Athens. It was in a downtown that was just been abandoned by Davison's, the department stores of the world. And so it's pretty much a ghost town, 1 or 2 bars and restaurants. But Athens adopted the Twilight. And this eco-urban event belongs to the Twilight. It belongs to Athens, not me. First event at 40 participants, won by a Tasmanian Olympic medalist, Janie Clark. Anyway, I sold the bike shop in 2005 and have done nothing but events since then. I've done events in the streets of San Francisco, on Pennsylvania Avenue, at the Alamo, in Harlem, so all around the country. But Athens is still considered the best criterium in the world. And it's been recognized by a lot of different sources like Outside Magazine, and it was on NBC Sports that covered the Tour de France. So in 2019, we hosted 14 countries and 31 states in the participants in the event itself. So the Twilight is unique. It attracts cross-cultural and cross-generational people to the event. Anyway, to address the festival zone, it has been, I think it's been very workable. It's helped support special events that are in downtown Athens through the sale of wristbands, which was an added income source, which is sorely needed. But it is different than any other open container ordinance I've seen throughout the country. But so is Athens. The 4-block festival zone is a bit confusing to attendees and businesses on the course for us. For smaller events, it works fine, but for us, we're forced to kind of choose which 4 blocks, who's going to be the recipient.
30 seconds.
Okay.
Sorry.
It also drives the need for many different, we have to use the cafe area zoning now, and that drives the use of a lot of police officers that I think could be better used served in a festival zone. So our recommendations quickly is to expand the 4 blocks to allow events to have a festival zone in the entire area covered by the special event permit. Not necessarily required to be the entire event, this special event area, but allow that. Require police officers as recommended, which I believe right now is 1 per block for these events. I would like to think that would only happen in the evening, because I don't think we need that same kind of coverage in the morning. Do you want me to shut up or should I keep going?
That is time, but
How about we give you 30 more seconds?
I got 30.
Okay.
Keep the wristbands and identifiable containers in place that is written now, and possibly look at how to do away with the cafe beer garden concept as it is now, because that allows us to exclude businesses that are on the course, that are adjacent to the event. And I don't think that's really correct for those existing businesses. Anyway, thanks. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to, you could email those recommendations to me as well as I'll share with the rest of the group. Thank you. Any other public input? Okay. Let me then turn this over to the staff. Our mission here is to review the current downtown festival zone guidelines to determine elements that would need to be in place to recommend a larger zone. I did talk with the mayor yesterday about this. Right now, we're working under a pilot program. So he also does anticipate that we would recommend a permanent special events guideline, festival zone guidelines. And so if there's any other tweaking of those guidelines that need to be done, we could also address that as well. And I'll pass that over to staff.
Okay. So if I could, I'd like to quickly go over the history of this particular topic, because we've been working on it since February 2020. Also, I would then turn it over to staff to talk through some lessons learned, specifically Central Services and Police Department. I'm going to ask the Central Services folks to kind of walk us through the permit process, and the Police Department kind of talk to us about some qualitative data and maybe some quantitative data. And after that, I propose for us to kind of have questions, open discussion with commissioners. That's okay. February 4th, 2020 is when Mayor Gertz first gave the LRC the charge. And I want to read this charge because I think it's really important for us to hear this, because we can understand how we landed where we did. So review and make recommendations regarding current alcohol serving opportunities for special events on public properties and public rights of way, including flexibility regarding shape and size requirements of drinking areas, food service requirements, furniture requirements, and consideration of the ratio of police officers required per physical size of occupancy, as well as review areas managed by leisure services. So leisure services staff is here as well. They aren't particularly involved in the downtown and the festival zones, but they have a tangential process. And if you guys want to hear about that later, please ask them. They can talk about that. So July 22nd, 2021. So there's a huge gap, right, from 2020 to 2021. Pandemic probably had something to do with it. LRC reviewed staff recommendations. So staff came to LRC with recommendations on how to kick this thing off. We recommended one festival zone, not more than 2 city blocks initially. Modification of the requirement for special outdoor cafe areas that do not utilize the festival zone. So basically, we were trying to determine whether we wanted both or just allow one. At that point in time, we noted not to exceed 4,000 square feet or up to 2 cafe areas, and each cafe area could not be more than 2,000 square feet. We also recommended that we remove the seating requirement. So there was a special events ordinance that required seating and food. So we recommended moving that out because we just didn't see a need for it. Candidly, I don't think anyone recommended or understood how that was recommended in the first place. So after that, in the same meeting, staff recommended that the committee establish a pilot program. Committee agreed. LRC voted unanimously to approve the recommendation of this ordinance with one amendment. We talked about plastic cups the entire time as we were talking about festival zones, but the committee thought at that time we should make this amendment approved cup or container. So not a plastic cup, but approved cup or container. And that's where we are today, by the way. So the Mayor Commission discussed the recommendation at the August 3rd meeting. Because we didn't think there was enough public input, the chair asked if we could send it back to committee, and which we did. So that was on August 3rd of 2021. August 5th of 2021, the LRC met again. And in that short period of time, there were some changes. Let me go over these changes. Allowing the approved container was one, permitting no glass drinking vessels at all in the festival zone. Removing the designation of city blocks of festival zone, so that's when it went from 2 to 4. Determine special conditions of the permit. So you'll notice in the ordinance, we've got these special conditions that we are asking the organizer to adhere to get the permit. And then limiting festival zones no larger than 4 city blocks, then extending the pilot through January 31st, 2022 at that time. So what's really important here is that in those 2 days, we kind of narrowed it down. We made it better, we thought. August 10th, 2021, Mayor Commission vote unanimously to approve it. Then we come back to the Mayor Commission to ask for an extension of the pilot program because there weren't enough festivals or takers of the festival zones for us to really have a good idea of how it was working. So here we are today. January 31st, 2023 is where that pilot was extended to. So we're beyond that a little bit. And I'm going to read to you the mayor's new charge. And the mayor's asked us to complete this task by March, which I think we can do. But if we go through it at any point in time and you all don't think we can, please let us know. And maybe the chair can talk to the mayor to see if we can get additional time. But I do think we can get through this within that point in time, that period of time. And mind you, at this point today, the pilot is done. So that's pretty important. Okay, so the mayor's new charge. Review current downtown festival zone guidelines to determine the elements that would need to be in place to recommend a larger zone. Traditionally, we stick to the mayor's charge as it's written. And if we're sticking to the mayor's charge as it is written, that means we just need to focus on the festival zones, period, and think about what elements we would need to do to recommend a larger zone. So that's what the charge says today. And we have been known to deviate from the charge a little bit, but it is my job to kind of speak to what we're being asked to do. So with that being said, we can move this conversation to the lessons learned. I'm going to ask Interim Director Hassemer to talk through some of those lessons learned and walk us through the permit process as it stands today for festival zones.
Sure, appreciate everyone's opportunity to be here. Real briefly, from a central services standpoint, we have traditionally coordinated special events, specifically Angel Behind Me. in reality, aside from the coordination, the paperwork, the permitting part of it, we don't necessarily have staff, manning, if you will, the special events when they're happening. That is more of other departments, such as police, even leisure services, TPW, things like that. We're strictly, more of the administrative side of it. Nonetheless, I think it's important to keep in mind that special event, particularly a festival zone, is something that is occurring in the public right of way. And that's something that we all need to be aware of, that it involves cloaking the street. It also involves, if you're doing a festival zone, alcohol consumption in a public right of way. And so certainly the PD can maybe elaborate more on that and the regulations that go with that, or the attorney's office. It's also important to keep in mind that a special event doesn't necessarily mean a festival zone. A special event can take place and essentially is its own permit for any type of event that meets that definition. Embedded within the special event ordinance is the opportunity to also have alcohol consumption, which is tied directly to a festival zone. So I just want to make that clear distinction, that this would not affect all special events. Briefly, as Manager Jones kind of elaborated, before we got to the festival zone pilot program, there used to be what was called cafe areas, and that was essentially done away with and replaced with the larger festival zone, which is basically an entire city block, up to 4 of them. Or you can still go with the smaller option, which is the beer garden, essentially changing the name from the cafe to the beer garden option. So we left both options on the table in the current pilot program. We can certainly speak to some lessons learned thus far on implementation. It's important to keep in mind, though, that this pilot program has essentially operated for maybe about a year in its true form without interruptions from COVID as well. I mean, we had COVID restrictions in place on a number of people that an event would have and whether that qualified. So all of that still sort of interrupted our research into how events truly use the festival areas. From a permitting standpoint, the process is they usually make contact with Central Services, specifically Angel. There is an application for a special event. There's also more information that's needed if you're applying for a festival zone or a beer garden. She handles a lot of that paperwork. She'll also make contact with other departments in the government that are involved in this process, especially for street closures, for security purposes. And she'll get feedback from those departments. It's important to note that special events do allow staff to come up with conditions of approval based on individual special events and the size of the event and the type of the event. We try to remain as neutral as possible and take it on a case-by-case basis, but that's why we give that feedback. We get them in touch with the police department. They usually have a mandatory sit-down with PD about security and some of the things that PD expects them to go forward with in preparation for the event. And essentially, if all that is taken care of, we'll issue a permit for it. We can take specific questions if you have them about the process, and Angel can answer those as well. But from a lessons learned standpoint, there is obviously added time, staff time that goes into administering this type of process. We've learned that just like the applicants themselves, there are ups and downs in meeting all the process standards. That said, I don't think we necessarily are here today to recommend a different process or any kind of different standard than what is currently in place. We're certainly open to them if that's what the committee decides. But when you think about the educational portion of making sure that not only participants in a festival zone or in a special event understand where they can and cannot consume alcohol, there's also the other side of that, and that's the general public that are not part of the special event or are visiting some of the businesses. There's an expectation there that they also understand whether they can consume or not consume alcohol. And certainly that can cause confusion during some of these special events, which I think PD can certainly attest a little bit more to. But that's really some of the side of it from our thing. I think so far we've had four
this past year.
this past year that have utilized the festival zone out of all of our special events. So,
Can I just clarify one thing you said? You said you're not recommending any change, not necessarily recommending any changes. Do you mean any changes from the ordinance pre-pilot or any changes from the pilot?
I would say from the pilot, if thus far, based on the charge that the mayor has given, we understand that charge and we will work with the committee if that's the direction they decide to go with some changes. But at this point, from a central services standpoint, we wouldn't necessarily recommend any changes at this point.
What were the four groups from last year?
The four events that we happen to know?
The First Athens Bank had a festival, and so their festival zone was only, excuse me, was only one block.
First American.
Yes, and that was in March, and then Twilight had their event, and they had the full festival zone, 4 blocks. Creature Comforts had an anniversary party and in May, and they only did 1 block also. And then Wild Rumpus had theirs in October.
How many blocks on that?
They had 4 blocks. Yeah.
Can you review what the barriers are, how that works for the festival zone? I mean, I understand the beer garden, but I'm trying to visualize this again, getting my mind back in here for the festival zone, because there are barriers.
Are you talking about physical barriers?
Yeah, I'm talking about physical barriers, like what it, like, can anyone review that for me, all of us? Yeah.
I guess I figured. On the festival zones, typically it's just a set of pedestrian barricades across the intersection where it ends.
And what about the sidewalk?
It does not, there's nothing beside, everything's free pass.
Okay.
Barricades are at the ends of the festival zones and any intersecting streets out for said crossroads.
Okay.
And that's where the signage is, so it's just across the street.
Is it just for vehicle traffic, or is it a barrier also for pedestrians not in
They're
there?
pedestrian barricades that are in the roadway, but not blocking the sidewalks. And those indicate the ends of the festival zone, and those have the signage when the sponsors get their signage made. On the inside, it'll have signage saying you're leaving the festival zone. On the outside, it'll have signage telling people they're entering the festival.
And they've got to have a wristband to get into the festival zone?
No, they just have to have a wristband and train the festival. Anybody can go through the festival. So it's open to anybody walking on the sidewalk, anybody doing whatever it is that they want to do through the festival zone. Issue. It's only if you want to drink at the festival zone at that point. And each festival sets it up differently how they go about their spans, span for that festival.
Can you also add into that an explanation of how that works with bars and exiting from bars? So if I'm in a certain area, where there's a bar in that festival zone, how does that work?
If the bar is within the footprint of the festival zone, then they can exit the bar. And that's part of the education.
With a wristband?
They do have to get a wristband.
Okay.
And typically, I think the spirit of the festival zone is that all of those bars would be in partnership with whoever was sponsoring the festival. And they would then have access to produce or provide wristbands to people to go out into the festival zone. And also with the Angels portion of it, that's where those bars get educated, and we try our best to not get glass bottles, glasses, and liquor on the streets. But yes, if they have a wristband, they can walk into a bar, they can get a beer, they can walk back out, continue on about it.
And are you all going to explain how well that's worked in your lessons learned?
We can, if we're ready to talk about that. I would like
questions?
to add that real quick on the barriers, since you asked. The 2 primary decisions on kind of the layout of the barriers are not obstructing the sidewalk because we have to allow free passage of other people who may not be participating in the festival zone or the event down the sidewalk. And then the other is the ability to access for emergency purposes. So those are the 2 primary drivers for how we would set up the barriers.
Gavin, do we have an example of what we ask the organizers to use for educational signage for the students?
Yes, I can hand that out.
As part of the process, it might be good for y'all to see kind of what the organizer was.
We should have had a field trip. We should have gone to a festival together. And made notes and participated in the observation together.
Okay.
I'm not sure how we missed that opportunity. It was right there. Thank you.
What Angel is passing out right now is an example of what we hand to applicants that are interested in doing a festival zone. It essentially gives them notice that it is their responsibility to make sure that they are educating not only their patrons, but also neighboring businesses that are affected by their festival zone about the requirements and the regulations. And so it kind of is an informational sheet on the front. The next sheet is an example of neighboring businesses that they actually have to indicate that they've talked to and let them know that they're having a festival and sort of this is what's going to happen and this is how you could be affected by it. So they actually have to turn that in to Central Services, to Angel, to show that they've reached out to those businesses. The next sheet is same example on each side, but this is essentially what they should be giving to patrons to let them know, listen, you're entering a festival zone. If you're not familiar with this, this is what it takes to consume alcohol. And then the final sheet, again, is an example of some signage that we would expect them to have posted at their festival zone as well. So that is something that all of them do get as part of the process and part of the pilot program.
So the festival zones, and I guess I should know this, but let me just ask. When we're talking about festival zones, we're really talking about alcohol consumptions, because there are other events that would not come under this same. Gotcha.
That's correct.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so one thing I would like to clarify, you listed the 4 events that did use this, and at least one event really stuck out to me that wasn't on that list, which was Athfest, where obviously there's a lot of alcohol happening at it, and they're in the street. So did that event, or did any other events share any information with Central Services about an interest in doing this sort of thing, but any, barriers? And we've heard from one event organizer today who shared what they'd like to change, but they did use it. And we heard from others what they'd like to change, but they didn't use it.
I did speak with the ActFest sponsor, and they said the way it is written that it doesn't work for them. They still do beer gardens because that works better for them.
Okay.
They didn't want to do the festival zone, and I cannot remember exactly why that didn't work for them, but I think it had something to do with how they make some of their income was through the beer gardens, and the festival zone would take some of that away.
Okay.
So they're making money, sorry.
Commissioner Wright, then Commissioner.
On this signage here, as an example for them, when it says you cannot bring alcohol into the festival zone, is that more accurately, is it you cannot bring your own? You can't bring outside alcohol into the area, and it's not whether it's any kind.
Correct. Essentially, the festival zone is that area where you're purchasing it on the street or you're purchasing it in a bar within that festival zone. Anything outside those gates is essentially bringing, you don't have permission to have alcohol outside those gates.
Right, and I guess for the folks, I guess it was the police department that was monitoring that. Was that an issue? Did you see people pull 12 packs out of their backpack?
I can't speak to that. What I can tell you in this broad stroke is that we did have an issue with the open container and regulating that. It was more a matter of confusion, I think, patrons and businesses. Lieutenant Basinger, he can certainly provide more granular details on what that looked like on the street, but we did have some issues.
So yes, we did.
Yeah.
And it's usually they're youngsters and it's not a huge deal, but they will bring their backpack full of beer.
And you would,
Anybody that can't get.
yeah. Wait for it, you know. So, but then would you rank that as being similar to any time these gatherings are happening, people trying to bring their own?
No. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, that you had eyes on it more so than trying to sneak.
Well, and this is my humble opinion, but I think more often than not, a lot of the issues that have come about are due to a lack of education as far as people knowing what they can and can't do. You know, we did the very first festival zone was Twilight that we ever did. And that was the year that COVID made everything weird. And that festival zone, that event went on in August, which was also a time that never happened for Wildlife and for all of us. Our calendars were out of whack because of it. And this was the first time we used it. And inadvertently, a significant number of downtown patrons didn't know the specifics of the festival zone, and a lot of the alcohol serving establishments also didn't know. And it was pretty much felt throughout downtown that this was just anybody could take open containers. And we had a melee on Clayton Street, which was not where Twilight was. And that led us to have a meeting with as many bar owners as we could to lay out the festival zone. So that was our first huge failure, was that they just didn't know, and they just, oh, cool, everybody can go drink.
Yeah.
And that didn't work. And it's the same with the outside alcohol. It's not as big of a problem, and it's always going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter what events you do, no matter what you do, there are going to be people that get outside with the container. There are going to be people that try to bring alcohol in. Look at the average age of our attendees for this sort of stuff. They're in that age group or involved in that.
Yes.
That's not a deal.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate that feedback, and that's, I think, what we were here for, to hear what was happening on the street.
Commissioner Culpepper?
All right, so what's the difference between a festival zone and a beer garden?
So beer garden is, before we had the festival zones, when you put on have a beer garden, it's a linear garden. It's literally, our beer garden is closed, it has an entrance. It's either 2,000 or 4,000 square feet. Usually the beer garden is dictated by what they're doing. So for Twilight, for years and years, those ones were pretty much the width of a parking space, and then I think 10 parking spaces long, made of 2,000 square foot, roughly. And that fit with the race course in the middle. But they were railed off, and you had one point of access, one point of entrance, control. As you came inside the beer garden, you couldn't take it with you outside.
So who has the alcohol permit for a beer garden? The bar that's across the street, or the?
So there was throughout history, there's been a number of different ways it's been done, but the state of Georgia has some interesting laws, and it is now the event is to have a caterer that has a liquor license.
And Commissioner Culpepper, if I could add, a 4,000 square foot beer garden is limited to 300 people. A 2,000 square foot beer garden is limited to 150 people. Whereas a festival zone, there's not a limitation.
Wide open.
But can vendors, like in a festival zone, can any vendor sell alcohol there, or do they have to have a permit for that?
I believe.
If they're on the street, so if it attaches to a business, if you have a bar, and it's attached to the bar, they can sell from the bar.
Right.
But the state of Georgia is weird. It's outside of the four corners, the four walls, then it has to be a separate license or permit. And those are typically, a lot of caterers have liquor licenses to cater events and serve alcohol events. So that part of it's not a deal. That has to do not with Athens-Clarke County.
But like she was saying with Athfest, they like the beer garden better because they can make money off of the beer garden. Is that right?
Yeah,
They
that's,
control all of the alcohol.
So the event person controls all the alcohol.
yeah.
Festival zone, the event person does not control it.
They control the festival zone, but any business, any liquor license that
Which is within that zone.
also participates, if it makes sense.
Okay.
It's more of a,
What has been the feedback from the bars? Do they like the festival zone or the beer garden better?
be honest with you, I've never asked them.
Well, I think that, the festival, if they're in the festival zone area, they probably prefer that.
Right.
But a lot of them didn't fall within the areas. And back when we only used beer gardens, then the event sponsor got to decide which businesses got to use those beer gardens. So even then, not everyone got to participate.
I'm just following up on clarifying that, the beer garden thing, because I know from AtFest, the beer garden is like in the street, it's clearly separate, right? And so that's always felt like to me as a user of it, that it's run by the organization and somehow they have the right license for doing that. For Twilight though, this is like news to me again as a user of Twilight. So all those little beer gardens were beer gardens that Twilight was paying for, and then somehow they were working with the bars, because I was just, sort of thinking as a person walking down the street that somehow that bar had gotten that. So could you clarify that?
They have to pay with the beer garden.
Uh-huh.
They're allowed two different sizes. One is for 150 people and then one is for 300 people.
Yeah.
But you can only have one size 300 people for the event area. So most of them were 150. And they have to pay the government $150 for each beer garden that's for 150 people. $300 if it's for a beer garden for 300 people. So they get the permit, which approves those beer gardens, but then we don't necessarily know who's going to go in them. The event sponsor gets to decide who goes in those beer gardens.
So it was Twilight who was paying for the county that money?
Yes.
Right, and then they worked something out with the bars?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Hu?
Couple of questions. First, so during the pilot period, people could take the pre-pilot approach with beer gardens or exercise the festival zone under the pilot, or both, right?
Correct.
If we move forward, is central services, when you say your recommendation, I'm just trying to understand kind of the baseline here. Is your recommendation to keep in place the festival zone as an option and keep in place the beer garden as an option and continue to let people do either or both?
Yes, I mean, at this point in time, we just don't feel there's been enough time that has gone by and enough events for us to give any sort of recommendation to change what's written currently. Yes, that would be.
Keep the pilot.
And I'm also understanding correctly that because the pilot was legislated as a pilot, for us to keep that in place, we actually have to still take action to at least solidify the pilot as a permanent code change.
That's right.
Okay.
We can't extend the pilot.
We could extend the pilot, or we could just say this is the new code, and then from here, we'll come back and revise it if necessary.
And John, this was a checkpoint, and we extended it last year to make sure that we could have the MLK Junior Parade Festival have the pilot. And so part of us was, as I'm recalling, as you went through the history, it was we haven't had enough festivals yet to really try it. So we're still in the newness of it, with that. And
Do we want, okay.
I guess my question then is, if we don't have enough data or information and we consider to extend the pilot, how much time in your mind would that extension look like? And does that change the mission, the charge that the mayor has given us?
Possibly, but if I could I ask the police department to give you all the lessons learned from the police department right now?
Yeah, we didn't get to that part.
No.
Just, so you have all the information, to make a decision.
All right, wait a minute, lessons learned.
Sure. So I guess just to kind of back up, I want to reiterate a couple of points. Our goals with any special event is to safely facilitate that event, right? And so the festival zone or the beer garden impacts how we might manage that. And then we want to do so lawfully, both within county ordinance and state law. So those are our two primary goals. The second is we have an interest in reducing what I would say is conflict points between our officers and the public. So points where we have to take enforcement action and it's a point of conflict and it could lead to an escalation or a problem. And any way we set it up to reduce those points of conflict would be beneficial. The third thing is We look at this as there's a shared responsibility between the county and the police department on the ground, and then the festival sponsor to make sure that these things are being done. And we see it as a shared responsibility. To that end, we do side with central services, and I think it's too early to expand. A couple of problems we did see was the confusion, and we did have a lot of the open containers moving in and out of the festival zone, and not even in close area, in an area close to the festival zone, but blocks away. And people just didn't understand, and there were some educational failures there. And so I think that's a point that we need to look at improving or figuring out how we can strengthen, whether that's through increased signage, increased opportunities for education, or some strengthened mechanism to ensure that occurs. The other thing is, we can manage a small area pretty simply with one entry point and one exit point, or two entry and exit points. But the larger it grows, the more difficult and unwieldy it will be from a safety standpoint. So we might have to increase the number of officers that would be required. So if you go from 4 blocks to 8 blocks to 12 blocks, we now have a larger footprint, and you're going to increase your entry and exit points, and then you're also going to have larger spaces in between with more people. So there's an impact there as well. But I think the greatest lesson learned is that people just didn't seem to understand or recognize what the rules were. And so just the thing to remember here is that the ordinance effectively changes the rules in the public street for a short time period, and the rules that people are used to. And so there's an onus there on the county and the sponsor to make sure that that's understood.
Any questions?
We've got a great staff, if y'all don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Commissioner Hul?
I'm asking a lot of questions already.
Oh, you got a lot.
I said I've already asked a lot.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. So I'm back to my questions. What's the timeline, and does that mean that we, and how does that impact the mayor's charge?
I think the mayor's asking us to consider the elements it would take to grow it. Staff is not going, we would not recommend that we do that. However, if that's the will of this body, we certainly can come up with those elements. But at this point, we still think that, it's too early to tell. And we would like to have a few more festivals under our belt.
Yeah, because Alice and I want to go drink some beer.
I think
We didn't try it out. We need to be on site.
Taste testing.
We need taste test.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, remind me about, I felt like for festival zone options, that the police department sort of said, yes, this is a good way to do the blocks. I remember for Twilight, you guys had some good input for that. Is College Square festival zone potential?
Absolutely.
Has it been yet?
No.
So so we even have areas that have yet to be facilitated or observed. And then also now that Clayton Street's done, we haven't had any, official celebration. We haven't had any official special events in the new Clayton Street also, right? Because now we have the ballards, and I don't know if those would be helpful.
So the bollards would help from a safety and security standpoint, because obviously one of our concerns is vehicular traffic. Anytime you have a large crowd gathering, some of our events, as we heard last night for those who were at the meeting, have had people show up to demonstrate against the event. And so those are certainly helpful for safety and security of everybody who's attending the events. The other thing is, every city block is unique. There's different alleyways, there's different entrance points, there's different layouts. And so each area presents different and unique challenges. And so there's no one size fits all for a festival zone either. That would speak to the planning time and the staff resources to make sure that we do it correctly. So it's safe, it's efficient, it's effective.
Gotcha. And then on the improvement that I think I had heard was that the Rompus Festival Zone shall be at the end of the parade versus the beginning. That can be incorporated administratively if that were to be a repeat request from that special event. for next year. Is that correct?
Yes, because the festival zone footprint has to be approved through the county before it can be put in place. That was a point that we realized we had an issue because the parade started there, people were drinking, and then they carried their drinks with them down the parade. And this Lieutenant Basing told me some went ahead and filled their pockets in preparation for the launch. Yeah, that was a lesson learned as well.
Well, but what sounds like from your lessons learned list, it's more of a tweaking within the pilot and what is already administratively, you guys mapping out where the area would be. Does anybody know, and if you don't, we can get it as a follow-up, how large is the space that would include college? If we started trying to have a regular area that people are used to, that's a special event, with college squares, vehicular, and then where the bollards, all those were popped up. Is that larger than what we allow now?
Not sure I'm understanding your question.
Like if somebody said, if we started on a regular basis, special event says, give me the safest place, which is where vehicles can't go crashing through.
Right.
College Square, the bollards are up. Is that larger than what our pilot allows? That space that would happen with that definition?
Well, so specifically from where the bollards or the planter boxes are at Clayton Street down to Broad is going to be smaller. That's just one city block, and it can be up to 4 city blocks. But if you want to incorporate intersection at College and Clayton and then draw it out 1 block each direction, then that's going to be 4 blocks. But each block's unique. Some blocks are a little larger than others and have a larger footprint.
But so the mayor's charge was for us to be talking about if we are recommending larger. And the feedback I'm hearing is it's pretty large as it is, what we're allowing.
It's pretty expansive from our perspective, and I would say if you were going to expand it, I think from our recommendation would be under the conditions of it requires some additional officers to staff a larger area, that you have improved signage to make things more clear in the festival zone, outside of the festival zone. We have some stronger language related to the education, and then as well as the shared responsibility to take corrective action if something is problematic at the moment the event's occurring. So that's a shared responsibility for the event coordinator as well as the police department to correct something. Hey, this spot's not working now that it's all set up. You know, we notify the sponsor and request that they take some corrective action to make sure we don't continue having problems during the event. And if we can do those things, and I think demonstrated success in the education and the current footprint, I think those things to be necessary before considering expansion.
Yeah, and I think too, because when I visualize this thing, and a lot of times when you go someplace, the signs that you're supposed to read are like on a table hanging down, which you can't see when you're walking around, you know, as far as like up signs versus them being at the bottom of the table where you get your wrist band. But help me remember when we talked about this to begin with, part of me thinks while you were describing, you could have a little more help with the education. And I was thinking, wow, I wonder if you could have, I don't know, education ambassadors or people who are volunteers helping educate. But I think you guys told us that you really didn't think it was appropriate for volunteers or non-educated as you are folks telling people they can and can't come in and out with the beer.
You mean during the event itself?
Yeah,
Okay.
when you were saying some of that education, would it be okay if special event volunteers were helping at the gates to let people know they can go out with it?
I don't think there's a problem with that. I think the ordinance does read that the onus is on the sponsor to provide the education of it is now. So I don't see that it was to preclude that.
Okay, and so that seems like that could be an enhanced.
Well, that seems like a best practice, right? They
It
should.
has been done.
Yeah.
And it actually works a lot better. At every exit point, there's a police officer.
Right.
But some of the events have some volunteers, and if they have enough volunteers there to help.
Right. All right, and then one more thing in the reality of what you're sharing on having a larger space, we're also learning the cost of that larger space and the cost of the extra manpower from your professionals. So I'm wondering if, as a group, I'm ready to just continue the pilot for another year myself, but what are you thinking, Chair? Did we want to study this again at our next meeting?
Well, I guess that's what we're up to, that part of the discussion here, in terms of this, or even, is there any continuation with some tweaking? I'm like, I know that there were signage. I mean, I remember reading through here and there was some wording about how big the signs had to be. And I'm wondering if needs to be corrected, so that we don't have small signs and signs hanging down. Does anyone know where that wording is in here that says?
Is that the one that's grayed out?
It is. Well, I guess I would ask Director Hassemer, do we define the sign?
Yeah, actually,
the size of the signs?
Under general requirements, number 5, yes.
Okay.
It says the possession of alcohol beverages beyond this point is prohibited, and says the letters of such sign shall not be less than 3 inches. Well, 3 inches is pretty small when there's crowds of people. It seemed to me that it would need to be a bigger, more visually grabbing sign than 3 inches. Am I correct in that assumption, or?
Yeah, we wouldn't be opposed to increasing the size of the sign.
I think the police has had some trouble with the signage also. And I mean, one of the problems comes in that the event sponsor sometimes doesn't come with the correct signage. And then Lieutenant Basinger or whoever's working is having to deal with that on site, that they didn't come with enough signage or the correct signage. So that's one thing that we need to work on, as staff, I guess. But I don't know about the size. I mean, I don't know where they would hang it if we got it too large, because now I think they hang it on the barricade.
They typically do, and it hasn't been a size, I guess, something hasn't been an issue. And again, that's why I think we're all here talking about it in the pilot. Going down 6. So
Counting from the beginning, yes.
6 festivals. And each one of them has had a set of challenges that we've learned from. And, and it's little things like we've learned if you get Suki to put a trash in a recycling bin beside the exit signs, you have a lot less of an issue. They have some pretty way.
Yeah.
But if they're, 100 yards at the block, then they don't see the trash cans, they don't think about it, and they wander off with it. So, and a lot of that is the learning curve, not just on the sponsors, but also on us as we have figured this out. So I mean, I'm okay with how the sign verbiage is written now. A lot of it has come down to figuring out where sign placement is and having enough signs for that. And some of them have just been honest snafus, and some of them have been oversights. So, that's one of those things that we still have struggled. And when we get it right, it works very well.
I'm wondering if we need to give the staff an opportunity to see if there are any actual specific small tweaks to the wording before we continue the pilot, and we could.
And talk about it next time.
Yeah, and we could follow up on it next time. Commissioner Hould, and I think Commissioner Wright had a point.
Yeah, a few things. The first, I'm largely in agreement with Commissioner Wright about wanting to continue this, but I'm thinking from like an event planner's perspective as best I can, that maybe we would do well to just codify the pilot language as the new code and still make it a point to check in. Like, we're thinking of it as still a period of seeing how it works, get more information, and maybe make more adjustments. But at the very least, people who are trying to plan events in this community can get some kind of an assurance that, this is the code to be working from on a more basic level. Instead of, I think there's maybe a sense of anxiety around when we call things pilots and we put deadlines on them. Can I even count on this being around next year? And when I'm seeking sponsors, or when I'm seeking to bring in talent or plan an event, and all the things that go into it, the nature of a pilot, I think, makes it harder for event planners to do this when they're planning things a year ahead of time. Um, so that's just like a procedural note about how I prefer maybe we go about what we're still maybe thinking of as a pilot. I do have a question about police staffing specifically. We heard from a public commenter about the time of day. And am I understanding correctly that right now the way the ordinance is written, the size of your zone dictates how much staff you need. It doesn't really take into account time of day. Would you see it as true that there's, more people needed at night than are needed by day, or do you need the same amount of people any time of day?
I think that depends on the specific event. Some may be busier at night and others may be busy day. I don't know if it might be, that may just be too specifically defined or narrow it's just not something I think we can reasonably predict. Because each event will be different. Right now it's written so we have to have, in a festival zone specifically, at least one officer at each entry and exit point. Our only recommendation be that would continue, but if you expand it to a much larger area, then you may have to have, 1, 2, 3, or however many in the broader area of the festival zone. Larger crowd, you have greater distances between entry and exit points and ability to access, see medical equipment and things like that.
And then if I may, I have the other questions, if I may.
Go for
The
it.
other is, thank you for your input, very helpful. I've heard mention of TPW, who I know isn't here, and solid waste isn't here. We do have leisure services here
Yes.
we haven't heard from. I feel like I'd benefit from just a little more information on what the other departments are that have to have boots on the ground, and when we're talking about the need for more staff or less staff, what are those other departments' needs? Could we get a bit of that?
Sure, yeah, sure.
From a leisure services perspective, we're talking, for downtown, we're talking primarily equipment. The mobile stage, the barricades, sometimes the tents. And if the mobile stage is in use, we generally have staff there present for the protection of that equipment and the operation of that equipment if they're going to raise or lower, or if a storm suddenly comes, to be able to make sure it's secured and protected.
Would you need more, if the festival zone were larger, would you need even more staff it doesn't change anything for you? And what about for solid waste or TPW since they're?
We can certainly ask them. Have you heard from Suki or Stephen?
I don't think TP&W is usually down there. I think they depend on the police. They know the police is there to close the streets, and so they're okay with that. So I don't think they have boots on the ground. Suki, depending on the festival, sometimes the event sponsor will come and pick up recycling bins or trash bins. But like with Twilight, I think they have a scheduled time that they come through and do cleanup. And so for her, I think it would probably need more staff if the festival zones were larger.
So it sounds like the staff, from a cost perspective or logistics perspective, if we're to expand the zones, the two departments that are really going to see a change are the police department, or however security is handled, and solid waste maybe.
I think so. I mean, we've got a bunch of departments that review it, but those are only two I can think of. The fire department also reviews it, but I don't know that they ever are necessarily there.
So,
And then,
I'm sorry.
one last question.
You
if I
said you
may,
had a
but-
list.
Yeah, this is my third of three. I am wondering, you talk about the difficulty in public education. I think part of that is, we're doing things kind of the Athens way, and other people go to other communities where they go to a big event, and the rules there are just different. And a lot of times the rules in those places, you think of like New Orleans or Savannah, things are just more free-flowing generally, right? I also think that all the education in the world is probably going to not get us past the point of people in an event struggling to distinguish between a festival zone and a beer garden. I think it's just always going to be very confusing for attendees. So people who live in Athens go to one event like Athfest. I mean, I came to this meeting, being in previous meetings, not understanding that Athfest didn't even use this, So I can only imagine, how many people are just going to an event and not necessarily understanding that difference. I am wondering, is there lessons we can learn from how other communities approach just open container rules that might put less of a burden on y'all having to be at all these entry exit points, and instead just say downtown or this 4x4 block radius is just kind of open now, and how many staff do you need to just be kind of patrolling and making sure people are okay, but not necessarily manning every rigidly defined entry and exit point.
We could certainly reach out to some other, police departments, Savannah's an example. Ask them what their experiences are, how they handle, for example, River Street, right?
And I think that we also are responding to the mayor's request on this. So in terms of understanding, if we're going to continue this and not expand it, I mean, this is something that the event planners that we heard last night were concerned about, business owners downtown. So I think we need to understand the obstacles, perhaps from staff to get a list of any obstacles that would have to be overcome to expand it at this point as well, so that and I think actually knowing about some other communities would actually be helpful. Savannah seems particularly not parallel, but another, a city that is similar to ours or a college town, if there are any other models that are used and how they are burdensome or not burdensome to the event planners and businesses and such.
Are you recommending a road trip?
No.
Passenger that had his hand up.
Yes.
No. I had my hand up.
Okay.
I
Okay.
had my hand up.
Okay.
You said, Commissioner Meyer, you said that you would like for staff to look at the draft ordinance and, look at what the changes and stuff are, right? So that's
one tweaks, right?
What tweaks, right? And then, we were going to, I think that staff has given me, now maybe everybody else might be a little quicker than me, but they've given me enough information that says we need to have some more time for, well, he doesn't want to use pilot, but, we have enough information. Now, it probably needs to be in writing so we can make sure the mayor understands what we're doing. And my last thing is, maybe I'm just like loving Athens, but I think Athens sets the tone for a lot of other communities. Now, while we're going and looking at other folk are already looking at us. So we should take what we're learning from the experts and implementing something and be in front of the band. Now, I agree that we need to look at other areas just to make sure, but I don't think, based on what staff has told us, that we should give them some credit and moving forward. And at the next meeting, if there's other resources you want staff to look at to make sure they're tweaking, but we should not leave here at the next meeting with that. I was really hoping we did a vote today, but I'm good. Next month will be fine. But we should be able to move forward on this, and so we can move on to our next agenda item.
Oh, yeah, I'm very much in agreement with you. I'm very much in agreement with you. It's just making sure we have some reasons to explain.
Heard a bunch of them today.
Right. Well, I just mean in a sort of a report form.
And that's their job, and that's his job.
That's what I'm asking for.
And my point again, we do this, and every time we ask for other stuff from other places, it's almost like we discount what our people are telling. I know that's not the way you mean it, but that's the way I take it. And so I think, yeah, we look at other stuff, but dang, we got skills, we got brains. I mean, let's create an agenda. That's all. I don't want this to become debatable, but next month, we should not be coming back with a bunch of questions and suggestions. If there's something that staff needs to know in between there, shoot them an email, but let's vote on this next month. I can't be prepared to vote today, but I'll wait till next month.
Commissioner Wright and Commissioner Culpepper.
I would like to hear what Lieutenant Basin say before I get my chime in.
Commissioners, when we put this together, we a lot of other cities, and a lot of the stuff that we have in ours actually came from Milledgeville. And if you look at Milledgeville, where ours is different, ours is an ordinance. Milledgeville does it as festival. But very similar, demographic as far as it's for their, they have a college and they do a music festival in the streets for a particular amount of time, but they don't do it, they don't have it as a some weird way every year. It's like a mayor, fine. But we did take a lot of that that applied, that we felt would apply here. So we didn't look at Savannah. What village?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, LT, because I failed in my expansive history to talk about the comparative analysis that we did do at the very beginning. We were thoughtful when we created the pilot.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Thornton, I appreciate your words of encouragement for us. I will say this, our consternation is not really behind whether or not it's a pilot or if it's codified. It's really around expanding the size.
Well, Commissioner.
Go ahead.
So I also want to make sure we're moving this forward. St. Patty's Day Festival was first festival canceled from COVID. Remember, we were right on the brink of that. Savannah canceled theirs and we're like, everybody's coming here, right? So, somebody could be percolating that special events. What is our timeline? Let's say we go out of committee, and I see you got your agenda report ready when you went through the history. If we vote this out of committee on the 3rd, what is our timeline with the mayor commission approval?
That's what we already discussed that, and that's why we had the meeting on the 3rd, so that we could get in cycle to vote at the beginning of March.
So it would be a March vote.
Worst case would be title only at the agenda setting, but it would be.
Yeah, that is our goal.
Okay, perfect. And March vote, that's good. And I wonder if we could, this sign thing could be solved by us using little hotel motel money and have staff make the sign. And when the special event person comes, they get the sign, the signs. And so we could have them made so we know they're saying the right thing. We know they're big enough. They've got corrugated boards that you can get this stuff printed on, and then that way we'd be make sure the message is good. So that would just be my thought. And plus, in the note of reusable, it kind of fits in that it could be reused for each one.
Great.
So we haven't had that conversation, and we can certainly come back prepared to discuss that. But generally speaking, is that something we have the ability to do?
Again, we could always look at a durable material that's not metal. If it's a metal sign, that's typically something that traffic engineering, for example, would be responsible for, so I couldn't speak for them. We can certainly look at the signage issue. I think the lieutenant kind of touched upon it. It's not necessarily that the sign isn't there or that the lettering is not big enough. It's just the final execution of placement and number maybe. And, making sure that it's not in a position where all of a sudden a crowd is blocking the sign. And the way we've worded it in the ordinance is it doesn't say necessarily a set number or a set location. It says the most logical place. And I think that allows PD on the ground to potentially adjust to what they're seeing and, be able to say, listen, I know you put it here. It's to go over here right now because it's not working. I think that flexibility in the ordinance, the way it's written right now, is a good thing. But by all means, we can look at the signage.
And just from my professional, you can get 30 by 40 printed down at Athens Blueprint. I mean, it could be in the light corrugated stuff. And it could be that the festival people decide, we don't want to pay for this every year. They could have their own, but that could maybe simplify some of the confusion of how to take your content and make it what we expect to help.
And make it standard for people who are coming downtown.
It might look a little more official.
Yeah.
But, okay.
And Commissioner Copeland.
You wanted to have more information, like you'll make a vote. We meet again next month, is that correct? But we need more information because we need more events. Or we're going to have another event between now and next time.
Well, right now, the ordinance is running out because it was pilot. So we have to, we would just be continuing it with any kind of tweak. So that's basically what we're doing to extend it.
Yeah.
And I also realize if we go on the history there, Commissioner Thornton as well, Commissioner Poole and I came in on the second round of this, so we weren't actually in the beginning of this as well. So you were not here for 2 years. Right, so this is the same thing as well.
But the vote will be to extend the pilot in 30 days, not.
Or codify, that would be.
Yeah.
And then it goes into the packet, so the whole mayor, the full commission votes on what the committee is recommending.
It's just, because it could go to the full commission, they could all vote no.
But if we hadn't had any more events, because that's what I'm hearing is we need more events to really know how to write it. If we hadn't had any more events, we're not going to have any new data.
But the ordinance runs out, so it's not in effect at all. We're just gonna continue it. It's like it's canceled out, so we're gonna continue it. If there are any slight tweaks to the wording that need to be made from the police department or from central services, that would be appreciated. And I'm just, in terms of the mayor's request about the larger area, I think we were also hearing from those of us who were present last night from the festival producers who are really up against some logistical and financial challenges themselves. And so being able to better explain why making it larger at this point, just a short explanation and why we need more data would be helpful as well.
Just another summary with what you're saying, Chair Myers, is, John, we're not making any changes except to continue what's been tested. And I think I'm hearing staff say, after we do a few more, we might want to change more, and then we could maybe address what the mayor's wanting us to consider.
Right.
But since we don't have more festivals to consider with a larger zone details and impact, I think that's, so all of us will have to go to every festival in the next year.
And drink beer.
So we will be informed and have eyes on the ground with them.
If I could go over what our to-dos are before we finish up here. All right, so we'll make the tweaks that we think are necessary in the current ordinance. And what we'll do is, traditionally, we'll put the ordinance up here and we'll kind of go through it together. So I expect that'll be part of the next meeting as well.
If we can have any of that beforehand so that we can get to a point more quickly and efficiently to vote.
And then we'll do some additional research on Savannah just to make sure we understand how the police might handle that. And then I'll speak with central services, maybe bring in TBW. We'll kind of brainstorm a little bit about signage facing here as well. And in the meantime, in all of this, we'll be working on a staff report, not an LRC report, kind of a staff summary that we can show to organizers to kind of help folks understand, not just to organizers, to everyone, to help kind of understand our logic behind our recommendation. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Commissioner Zoll.
Moving forward, it sounds like we're probably gonna keep the pilot status quo going in whatever form. Would it be easy enough for central services staff when you're having applicants come in for special events? If they do the beer garden permit, just asking them and collecting some kind of information for us about if they've considered the festival zone and why they're choosing one over the other. I think it would be helpful for us to understand, we want to pass something that people want to use. And so if we've only got 4 events using this and 12 using the other, kind of why is that? And
We can do that, but it's kind of surprising. We had, like last year, we had 32 special events and only 4 of them had the festival zone. And I can only think of like one other, and that was Athens that had the beer garden, the beer garden. So, but I'm happy to ask them, yes, if they choose a beer garden.
I try to talk to everyone.
It's easier for y'all. The festival zone is easier for y'all.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily, in some ways it is easy.
More manageable.
Some ways it can definitely get, but the other side of it was, it's obviously from my perspective, the more times that I do it, the better. So my goal was to try to use this as much as I can.
Okay. So you know.
See where it goes.
Yeah.
And I did try with that. It's not a matter of us or specifically the festival zone. It's to do with how they view their offering. So it didn't really have anything to consider advantages or disadvantages.
And just, I think it'd be helpful for us to have that information if there's other events with similar situations, so we don't end up moving forward saying, well, we're gonna get rid of this entirely, and then actually that comes at the detriment of, you know, events funding structures that we assume are gonna be able to continue. Does that make sense?
Each one, every event that we do in that, especially the historic one, they have their own mantra of how they want to do things, where they want to do. So a lot of that to those of us that don't have a vested interest in it, doesn't really mean anything, but to them it does. So, like answering Commissioner Wright, when she was talking about using the 100 block of College Square, if you will, we've set that up and we've tried and gotten a lot of small events to go to that. It doesn't cost them anything, you know, like as far as energy or shutting goes. But there are a lot of people that, for whatever reason, that's not what they want to host, you know, this block in this place. And so all that's pretty much open for grabs. We can the water, but we can't make it drink. At the end of the day, it's their event, where they want to put it, you can there, we can't. As far as their ideology and why they want to put it there.
Interesting. Right. Great. Any other questions from commissioners? Any final comments from staff, from our assistant manager?
Yeah.
Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'd be glad to make a motion to adjourn.
Do you want to confirm quorum for our next meeting with the agenda?
Let's do that. Thank you for that reminder, Commissioner Hool. Let's confirm a quorum for the next meeting, which is
February 2nd.
February 2nd.
February 2nd at 1, and just a note on location, it's in person, but it's in the downstairs conference room. So 103.
Who has taken this grant?
We have budget meetings. Oh, sorry.
Best time of the year.
Okay. So are we all good for that?
I'll put it on my calendar.
Okay, good.
February 2nd?
Yeah.
It's on my calendar.
And you
Yeah.
said 1 o'clock now?
Yes, yeah.
Is mine?
Yes.
We got to get.
Those are the dates that I set out before. That
Yeah, I thought we already.
Yeah, well, it's on the agenda, so we're.
And I think I sent out the outlook.
Yeah, I've got February 1st.
Did I just say the wrong date? That's
Thursday the 2nd.
Thursday, February 2nd, 1 p.m.
Groundhog Day.
Sorry.
It's on the wrong.
Same.
okay.
So it's the 2nd, not the 1st.
Yeah, it's a Thursday.
So just do it all again.
Thursday at 1 p.m. Okay, now we have a motion
Second.
to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning? Okay, we are adjourned.
I just.
Thank you.
You are adjourned.